Bill, William Irvine, the author of The Stoic Challenge and The Guide to the Good Life. One of my favorite books, I'd say one of my foundational books. If I had three, it would definitely be in the top three. The Stoic Guide to the Good Life, or The Guide to the Good Life. And to have you on is a real privilege, so thank you in advance.
Well, pleasure to be invited, and I am looking forward to our chat.
So this is a health podcast, normally, and it has taken lots of twists and turns. And I think part of health, or a big pillar of what it means to live a good life is health. But to be healthy of body without healthy of mind seems a bit ironic. And I think a health audience can come away with the psychological tactics, tools, and techniques, different frameworks used by the Stoics. And I think it would affect their life in a positive way. So this is why we were so keen to get you on, Bill, because who better to speak to than the man who's studied this for a while, but also you're a practitioner. So I'd like to start with, why do people need a coherent philosophy? Or why do the Stoics think that people need a coherent philosophy to life?
Because there's a danger that if you don't have one, you will mislive, which is a really neat word that you don't hear thrown about much anymore. But you can spend your life going down a long road and doubling back and taking side paths that lead nowhere at all, and then having to double back to continue your travel down the road. Um, and a lot of times people are induced to do that simply because they look at what other people are doing, and they assume that somebody somewhere has done their homework on this. It's like a class where everybody's cheating off of everybody's paper, and no one has done their homework, so the whole class ends up not doing very well. So you shouldn't assume that other people have figured it out. You shouldn't have assumed that the crowd has figured it out. You need to reflect on your own about what life is, what your goals in life are, and you should devise a strategy for best achieving those goals. And in fact, for somebody to do that is highly unusual. We just assume, hey, the rest of the world's got it figured out. So we march off in search of success. And what is success? Well, often it's material and social success. And material success means you've got stuff, lots of stuff that other people want. And social success means that people look up to you, admire you, even envy you. Envy is a strange kind of emotion. It's a very dangerous emotion. But the thought that you want people to not only appreciate or thank you or say it's wonderful what you have, but you want to be the object of envy. And it's a disaster for a poisoned life. It's a recipe for a poisoned life if you follow that. And yet, it's the default that most people give into. So, a philosopher, in the true sense of the word, Thoreau said that these days there are people who profess philosophy, very few living, real philosophers, but a philosopher in the true sense of the word is going to take time to think about life. What's it about? What's the goal? And how can I achieve that goal?
What really brought me into the Stoic philosophy in general was, after trying to explore, similar to your journey into it, I sort of toyed around with Zen Buddhism and more Eastern philosophy. It's lovely, but it felt less practical. And the Stoics, as my understanding, they wrote their philosophy to be guides for living, and guides for living well. When it comes to finding a goal, as you said, was so important, otherwise you might mislive. How can we in our modern world go about finding that grand goal to seek?
You need to read philosophy, and most modern philosophy you should avoid because it's not going to tell you anything about that. It's a lot of very highly technical conversations about esoteric topics. But you can find that throughout history there has always been a subgroup of individuals who have thought about the question and who have done us today a favor by writing down the conclusions that they drew about life. And it isn't just philosophers. In religions, you can find people. You mentioned Zen Buddhism. In Buddhism, you can find people who have given this some thought and come to their conclusions. One interesting thing is the extent to which the Buddhists agree with the Stoics on what life should be, what you should be spending your day doing, what you should value, and how most people chase these illusions that even if they attain these goals that they have, aren't going to be happy. Another thing is, I actually came to Stoicism by way of Zen. So this would be 20 plus years ago. I was having what then would have counted as a low grade midlife crisis, and instead of abandoning my job and going off and living in the jungle or whatever, I decided I was going to become a Zen Buddhist, at least practicing, not go off in a monastery or anything like that. And then, since I'm now retired, but I was a college professor, it dawned on me that I could get what we call a twofer. That is two for the price of one. That besides getting deeper into Zen Buddhism, I could also write a book about it. And then I realized for the book to be properly academic, I needed to explore what the alternatives were. And so I started looking at these philosophies of life. And, the Greeks developed many of them. So you can think of skepticism, you can think of Epicureanism, and you can think of several. It turns out they have different schools, which we can go into in greater detail if you're interested. But among them was Stoicism. And it turned out that these schools are completely misunderstood. So what were the Epicureans? Well, they were the party animals. They said you should just live the good life. You should party hard. Well, no, in fact, just the opposite almost. And what were the skeptics about? You should doubt everything. No, not exactly. What were the cynics about? Were they cynical? No, not really. And then the last thing, what were the Stoics about? And the modern perception is that somebody who advocates Stoicism wants to simply stifle all emotion, live kind of emotionally rigid, just take with gritted teeth whatever life throws at him. And that's what I had thought. And then I actually read the Stoics and was quite amazed. No, that's not what it's about at all. In fact, the Stoics had a reputation for being unusually cheerful human beings. And that just seems like contradiction, but that's because we don't understand what the Stoics were about. So they weren't anti-emotion, they were anti-negative emotions. So let me pause there for a little side trip on emotions. You are wired to be an emotional animal. You were your distant evolutionary ancestors were emotional. They had a gut and a heart before they had a brain. And when the brain came along, this was pick your number, 10 million years ago, probably more, but less developed brain. It didn't displace the emotional aspect, your limbic system, for instance. It just took up place alongside it. So you had these two kind of contradictory forces at work in you, one wanting to reason its way through the world and the other wanting to feel its way through the world. Oh, by the way, I don't know you personally, but I can tell you this, that you started out as when you were born, first few years of life, incapable of reasoning your way to conclusions, but you know how to feel your way. So your heart and your gut were in charge. You would get angry, you'd get unhappy. So you have this emotional aspect. And so the Stoics said, if your goal is to overcome your emotions, forget it, because it's not going to work for you because you're wired to do it. So what you need to do instead is keep your head in charge in some sense while living a life full of positive emotions. So negative emotions, what makes them negative? Well, they don't feel good. So think about anger. think about, I mentioned it a second ago, think about envy. To be envious is a miserable kind of feeling to have. Think about fear, think about anxiety. Those are negative emotions. So, what are the positive emotions? It's interesting because we don't think of it in that terms. There's some big ones like joy, like the feeling of joy, but there's a whole bunch of uh, lesser ones, and they're easy to kind of underplay the importance. And one of my favorites is moments of delight, when you simply take delight in something about the world and how the world is. And the smallest things, if you think about them and put them into context, can be a cause for delight. So the Stoics weren't anti-emotion. They said what we need to do is minimize the number of negative emotions we experience, but we need to do things to foster the positive emotions, our ability to experience them. And then the interesting thing, and I'll stop talking here for a minute so you can get caught up with questions. But so they came up with a psychological strategy for optimizing your emotional life. And it's really interesting because you go into it thinking this is going to be philosophy, and it starts out that way, but it turns into psychology. Yeah, so we'll take whatever fork of the road you want to take at this point.
Well, brilliant. I mean, segues nicely. I think for someone who isn't familiar with Stoicism, okay, so far they understand it's a philosophy to live a better life. Otherwise, you to avoid misliving, and to do that, you must try and foster a grand goal above all other goals to keep in your mind at all times. So you have some purpose and why you're here and something you're chasing and working towards. And then it's about having more good emotions and less of the negative ones. Okay, and then I'm just sort of just so everyone's on the same page, the listener. And then from there, it's about these psychological tactics you can use to minimize the effect of these negative emotions. Have I got it right?
You got it right.
Okay, Phew, we're learning. I mean, I've got my very dog-eared copy of your book here, and it's brilliant. I do encourage people to check it out. So, when it comes to maybe if we start with negative visualization, because there's some fun experiments with this one. What is negative visualization, and how can it help minimize negative emotions?
Okay, so just the word negative visualization makes it sound negative, but in fact, it's one of these kind of paradoxical Stoic strategies where by doing something that just your common reaction is going to be, well, that's not a sensible thing to do if you want to be happy. But the Stoics understood the deeper psychology of it. So negative visualization involves visualizing something that's negative. That is, visualizing something that, if it happened, would make you unhappy. Uh, and uh, and there's lots of things you could visualize. For instance, the loss of your health, the loss of a loved one, the loss of your freedom. You can imagine in health specific aspects, the loss of your sight, the loss of your sense of smell. There are a whole bunch of things. Now, here's where we have to be careful, though, because you're going to be a really miserable human being if you fixate on those, or if you start just thinking only about bad things that can happen to you. In fact, that means you're overrun by anxiety, and that's a miserable life. So the key thing is it's a negative visualization. So for a few seconds, you just stop whatever you're doing and you imagine, well, suppose I didn't have the power or ability to do this thing that I'm doing. And then you kind of hold on for a sec, and then you let go and go back to life as you were conducting it. Now, sometimes when I do lectures, before an audience, I do kind of audience participation, um, and it involves, for me, telling everybody in the audience, okay, so I want you to negatively visualize losing your eyesight. And I said, in this case, there's a neat device you can use, and that is close your eyes. So I have the audience close their eyes and I say, okay, now think if this was as good as it got. Think if, and people do go blind. People are born blind. But think if this were your circumstances. And then I say, okay, in a few seconds here, I'm going to say, open your eyes. But before we do that, I want you to imagine that when you try to open your eyes, they won't come open. They've somehow gotten glued shut. This sounds very negative, but the upside is that when you do open your eyes, you will realize how much you've taken for granted. You see in not only vision, but you have color vision. Isn't that incredible? You have binocular vision. You can judge the depths of things. You have uh, you can recognize people's faces. You can recognize objects at a distance, and you start going through it, and you realize it's an absolute miracle that you have this. And guess what? Within 10 minutes after you do this negative visualization exercise, you will have gone right back to where you were before. You'll be taking it for granted once again. But here's the neat thing, it's sort of like when you get a medication, a prescription from your doctor that says use as needed. Same is true of negative visualization. Just easy to do, and it isn't that you go and you get into a prayerful position and you sit for 10 minutes. It's just you allow yourself to imagine yourself not having the things in life you appreciate for a short period of time. Okay, COVID, I read the numbers on this recently, but COVID killed 7 million human beings. And then we get into the weeds about how you actually figure that out. But a huge number of people, more than 1 million in America alone. And one good thing, so, a lot of times these things that seem just terribly negative actually have a bright side. One thing COVID did was it forced people not to engage in negative visualization. They weren't imagining it, they were living it. And suddenly, the things that they had taken for granted, like to get together with people and have a party, like to get on an airplane and fly somewhere, like to go to a restaurant, were taken from them for a period of, depending on where you lived, a year or two. And then you immediately realize, oh my God, I took that for granted. And yet it's absolutely wonderful. So it teaches you to appreciate what you've already got. And let me do a little side trip here into Buddhism. And why are people miserable? Well, one of the things that happens is whatever people have, they take for granted. And then they go around thinking, if only I had something else, then I could be happy. And the problem is it's what's called a hedonic treadmill. So they work really hard and they get to something else and they are happy for a minute, for an hour, for a day. And then it's the same process again. They start looking around. They just bought the car of their dreams, but then their neighbor zooms in with a bigger, better car. And they think, oh, if only I could have that car. This time it would do it for me. I would live happily ever after. And they're back on the pursuit and they work really hard. They get it. And the same thing happens. So they're like thirsty people crossing the desert. And off in the distance, they see an oasis. They see, drinkable water, just what I need. And they crawl across the desert to get there. And as soon as they get there, turns out it's just a mirage. So it's gone. But look, over there in the distance, that looks like water. And they start crawling again. So there's also a fancy psychological term for this. It's called the hedonic treadmill, where we are on this treadmill that we think will lead us toward happiness. But of course, we just stay where we are. Now, here's the Buddhist insight. So wasn't the Stoics, or at any rate, it's an insight that has occurred to a number of people on different occasions. But one of the insights is that uh, there are two ways to become a satisfied human being. And one is to get what you want but don't have. And that's one. That's the hard way. That's the obvious way, but it's the hard way. The other is to learn to be satisfied with what you already have. So there's a possibly Zen saying. I've tried to track it down, and and I think it is Zen, but to try to track down the exact wording, and it is, "He is rich who has enough." That's a wonderful saying, and a lot of people, I'm not sure they understand it. Yeah, right. That means if only I could get, this better car, I'd be happy. No, it's the other way. By learning how to be happy with the things you've already got, that's a separate way to achieve satisfaction if that's your goal. And you know what? If satisfaction isn't your goal, you're going to go through life a dissatisfied human being. So if satisfaction is your goal, it's the easier way to get it. Yeah, but you don't get all the stuff. Yeah, right. But that's okay. Because if you don't really want all that stuff, it's going to be fine.
The Shakespeare said a nice line some 400 years ago, which was, "All things are with more spirit chased than enjoyed."
Yes.
And I think he was bang on about the human condition. But
Yes.
negative visualization, in my experience, has helped me get rid of this, I guess it's societal ambition that gets infected into you. I've got to have the thing, got to have that car, got to have this status, and you start chasing these external goals which aren't necessarily yours. You'd be pleased to know I've done multiple experiments with negative visualization, and one was 30 days of the same negative visualization where I imagined I didn't have any legs before I get out of bed. And those 30 days were, I think I ran more than I ever have, and was so grateful, and it was just so lovely to be able to move my body. How do you personally use negative visualization?
It is a spontaneous thing during the day. And well, right now, this is the first time I've been seen in public without glasses on since I was a teenager. So I just had cataract surgery done, which gave me kind of mandated, uh, the possibility that my sight would be lost. Then, we don't need to go into the details, but you actually can't see, or you see really badly for a while, and then it all comes back to you. So, and if I get aches, pains, whatever, from, by the way, as part of this, I normally exercise a lot, but my doctor has said don't lift more than 5 pounds for 2 weeks. I don't know how to do that even. So anyway, I'm going to become extremely weak, but I'll have good eyes coming out of it. So negative visualization, you just imagine, and I was imagining this going into the surgery. So it's an interesting thing of just, am I ready? Because there was a long shot chance in all of these, long shot chance that things don't turn out as planned. Am I ready? Yeah. My brother went through life with only one functioning eye, meaning he would have lacked depth perception, and was fine. Was fine with that. And then you look at the things we do lack. For instance, I cannot fly by flapping my arms. It just doesn't work. Do I get all torn up about that and say, well, I can't do that? No. No, because I don't want to. I guess if I deeply did want to do that, that would be a really bad state of affairs, but I don't. So I focus myself on these things. And when I'm doing something, taking a walk, well, here's another thought. When I'm lying there and there aren't gunshots going off somewhere in the night that I can hear, isn't that absolutely wonderful? Because it could be, and it isn't. And that's just incredibly wonderful. When I see friends that haven't encountered for a while, isn't it great that they're still there? So what am I doing? I'm imagining what the world would be like if they didn't exist. And then it's really interesting because then when you see them, it's like, wow, they're still here. Isn't that absolutely wonderful? We take our lives so for granted, and as a result, we live lives of dissatisfaction when satisfaction is within our grasp. We get it not by physically grasping it, working hard to get it, but it's all in our mind. It's the approach we take to the world and our place in the world.
How can one balance falling in love with what you already have as a way to get back to appreciation and ambition?
Falling in love, you mean not with another person, but with what you already have.
Yes, sorry. So how can we balance falling back in love with what we currently have and appreciating the great circumstances we're in and ambition for the next thing and
Uh, okay.
future?
Falling in love with a person is a state of temporary insanity, and I mean that in the best possible way. Um, but the interesting thing is, Stoicism is a resolutely logical, reasonable strategy, and there are times when we are animals. We have this weird hybrid nature where yes, we have a mind capable of rationality, but we also have an emotional component. And if you fall in love, you're right on the intersection between those two. But would you want to live in a world in which love wasn't possible? Would you want to be incapable of love? That would be a terrible life. But back to your the other part of your question, this whole notion of appreciating what you've already got. There's a few other ways you can do it. Is one, do some history, look into the lives of your ancestors. You go back one generation, and I was just doing a kind of a research project, and I was thinking about this. Uh, so I do a lot of research involves me going to online websites, and then you check to see whether they're authentic and who's behind them, and whether it's somebody you can count on to come up with good stuff and reasonable stuff. And then I was thinking, what if I was doing this research 40 years ago? And what would I have to have done? Oh, I'd have to go to a library. I would have to physically go to a library. I'd have to go to the card catalog. I'd have to look up the person I was looking for. Are you familiar with card catalogs? You look young, are you?
I think I've seen them. I mean,
Yeah.
I wouldn't say I'm old. I've seen them in a film.
Yeah, sure. But I would have to do that. And then I would have to walk through the library. And if the library had stairs, there would have been an aerobic component. And I would go there only to find out that the book had been checked out or that it was misshelved. And then I would come away empty handed. And then just thinking of the incredible thing that the internet is. Now it has all sorts of downsides attached with it. But as a tool of research, as long as you're careful where you go, what an incredible thing it is. And yet, people take it for granted. A cell phone, uh, what a remarkable thing. If I could travel back in time to my grandparents and could have pulled it out of my pocket and said, look at this. And they said, oh, it makes sound. Oh, you haven't seen anything yet. Whoa, look at that. It's pictures. It's in color. It's so small. They would have thought that this was a miracle of, that they were in heaven, finally. And this is the kind. And now you look at people and it's just, oh, yeah, it's my cell phone. And you know what? They just came out with a new model. And I'm not going to be happy until I get that new model. It has better cameras, whatever it is they want to
Hmm.
say. Um, so thinking about your relatives and the life they live. Decade or two ago, I was somewhere. I'm not even sure where it was. It was out east somewhere in the United States, and went to the mansion of Rockefeller. The original what was he, an oil baron or whatever he
Yeah.
did, and got to tour the mansion. And I realized if you gave me the choice, I would rather live in my house than his mansion. How come? Well, we had air conditioning, we had refrigerator. You go through the whole deal. Oh, microwaves, they're so handy. And then you realize, but for at his time, everybody, that was their dream. Oh, if I could only be rich like that. So you can actually do some field research and go around or go to a different country. So one of my key childhood experiences, when I grew up, when I was like 6 and 7 years old, we lived in Chile, South America, and we were in what was called the American colony. I was just a kid, I didn't know what was going on. We had lived in Minnesota in northern part of the United States and then moved down there. And then suddenly I'm in this house where across the street, literally across the street from my house, is the Pacific Ocean. And I'm a kid. And I'm thinking, this is just how things work, everybody, you know, this is one of the things that can happen. And then I left my house to walk to school, and there were kids eating out of my garbage can. And, it's one of those things. And if you travel other places, you can see. So that we talked about traveling back in time before, but traveling geographically to other places, and you can see how other people live. Right now in America, there's this big thing about all of these foreigners coming to our country and taking our jobs. And I won't go into the political part of it, but, for them, we are we are the good place to be. And even if you can't travel, I've been using Uber and Lyft, for car, and I always make a point of talking to the drivers because many of them have come from other countries. And I had one driver, and he was from Kenya, or maybe Ethiopia or Kenya. And I said, well, what's life like back there? And he said, well, it's a very difficult existence. And I said, well, tell me more. And he said, we have what are called $3 jobs. And I said, oh, you mean like you go to work for somebody and they pay you $3 an hour? And he looked at me kind of astonished. He said, no, $3 a day. And it puts it into context, and you realize here you've got it so good. Could it be improved? Yeah. Wherever you are, you could make that extra, Elon Musk, this richest guy on earth is still, not quite satisfied. But still, when you look at how it could have been historically, how it could be geographically, you realize once again, if you are still complaining, it's not a problem in the world. The problem is in you and your approach to life and the values that you've adopted.
It's a funny thing, negative visualization, because I think it goes against your limbic system. It goes against your lizard brain. At least for me, when I do it about my partner, for example, if I say, okay, I'm going to imagine my partner's not here or something bad happen, then I don't want to think about something bad happening to my partner. But I know if I go through the exercise, the way I will show up in my relationship is significantly better and more appreciative, and I'll enjoy the moments more, as opposed to if I never went there in my head. So I think it does take some just upfront pain for a little bit of gain, because it's not nice to think about negative things.
Yeah, and
But
again, you aren't dwelling on it. That's the key thing. As soon as you're dwelling on it, it turns out to be a bad thing for you and your mental health. But to reflect on it is wonderful. And the world is full of people who work really hard to meet the person of their dreams, and then it's finally a deal. There's a stable relationship, and then what's the next thing that happens? That woman I saw in the grocery store, she's quite attractive, and then it's the same thing. Same thing over. You're back on that hedonic treadmill, and you know how the story turns out. and the world is full of people whose misery is self-inflicted, and it's because they haven't really given deep thought to their life, their values, and their strategy for attaining things worth having.
Mm. The old Terry Pratchett's answering machine. Have you heard about this?
No.
He apparently, if you called the late great author Terry Pratchett and you got through to his answering machine, it would go, "Who are you and what do you want?" And he said, "No, seriously, who are you and what do you want?" And take time to think about it. I think it's
Yeah.
brilliant because
Oh, I see. I see. I gotcha. Yeah.
yeah,
It is true. I've reached a stage of life, and there would have been a time in my life when I wouldn't have dreamed of doing this, but when I meet somebody new, for me, it's fascinating, because I find number one, people want to share with others. Most people, conversations don't aren't actually conversations. Conversations are just two people talking past each other, each one waiting for the other person to stop talking so they can reveal what the truth of the matter really is. But if you're in a really a conversation in which you truly listen to the other people, you really can fathom this. Okay, who is this, and why does what does this person want? Why do they want it? And so for me, that's been a key kind of thing. And there are people out there who are indeed happy, adjusted, appreciative, and there's a whole bunch of people who aren't. And it's tragic to me. It's
mm,
tragic because, like I say, it's self-inflicted. There are places where there are cruel people causing other people misery, and that's happening in the world right now. But there are many, many, many more places where that isn't going on, and yet people can't find the balance.
I agree. And actually, the most, I mean, especially the conversation part, and I think I can relate to being in the conversation, waiting to speak my turn, and actually the inner monologue goes, "No, be on receive as opposed to broadcast." And I'm trying to get better at it. Um, the the point I want to bring us back to was you said something to the effect of to take the time to figure out what you actually want in life, not going too personal of what was the conclusion for you, but how did you get there? How did you get to, okay, I'm Bill, I know that coherent thing I want in life? How did you get to that point?
Um, it's well, a research project I've just been doing. When I was in high school, just through weird circumstance, I read Henry David Thoreau's Walden, the book Walden, and it's only now as an old man that it's become clear what an impression that book made on my life and thinking. These just wonderful lines like, the mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. And then you look around and you say, well, he's right. Now, so he said, there's got to be another way. There's got to be another way. And for me, I suppose I went through a large part of my life knowing that. I suppose Thoreau was always lurking there in the background. I had just forgotten. But then the whole thing about my flirtation with Zen and coming up with this kind of idea once again of, well, what is it really all about? Because I know I went through a long phase where what it was really all about is, having other people think well of me. That whole, well, we're wired to seek social status. We want other people to think we're good, we're estimable, we're better, you name it. We're wired in our culture, at least, to play the how many things do you own game. Do you own things that are good? What do you have? And there are things that are better. And then it just became increasingly clear to me that those are games in which you cannot win. That it's like a fixed game, and yet you play it. Uh, in the social thing too, the whole social status thing, we're wired to seek it, and so our conversations Um, that's one of the things we're doing. Oh, and now, of course, you've got the web and you've got social media where it has become this really destructive thing where people are now out to show the world how perfect their life is, and by pictures and postings and so on. In fact, they're so desperate to do that that they go deep into debt. They reveal all sorts of personal stuff about themselves, which makes them open to being trolled, to being maligned, in public on the very platform that they're boasting on. Um, so that whole idea of simply not caring. When you're in a conversation, so I call them 80-20 conversations. That's where the other person does 80% of the talking and you do 20% of the talking. And in one of those conversations, it's really amazing because one of the reasons that you're satisfied with doing only 20% of the talking is that you don't need to tell them how wonderful you are. It's not part. It isn't even kind of a thing. You're very interested in them and their life, and at some deeper level in their well-being. And it's just an amazing thing to see because people aren't used to it. People aren't used to another person who's actually listening, carefully listening, and then asking questions of clarification. I never try to push Stoicism in a talk because it's a great way to learn to lose friends and so on. So I never try to push it. I don't try to push it, but there are teachable moments where somebody will say, if I could only have X, I would be happy. Yeah, I've felt that way about a lot of things in my life, but I've learned that it really makes more sense to just look at what I've already got and think about how lucky I am. End of speech, just little things like that, wanting to be helpful. Now, of course, I am capable of lecturing because look at the books I write where I give people a program in which they can work their way through and see some of these things. And if you don't want to hear me talk, don't buy the book. Don't read the book. But that I consider that's just an extension. I'm a teacher, and that's an extension of teaching. So there's classroom activities, but then you can do books and reach a much wider audience.
I mean, in the beginning of your first book, well, I don't know if it's you. Was this your first book, The Guide to the Good Life?
No.
First,
First Stoic book, but backing up because the book before this was called, what was it called? On Desire, Why We Want What We Want. It was there that I was describing Zen Buddhism. It was there that Stoicism it comes in a late chapter. So there's, I thought, well, I got to do the Stoics, and then was shocked by what I found. It's such wonderful stuff. And then the realization of, why doesn't the world know about this? I was a philosophy major and a philosophy graduate student, and the only place I encountered Stoics was in logic classes, right? Where, well, they invented, modus ponens, they came up with all of these logical inferences. And how could that possibly be when the stuff they got is so great? So I came out of that book thinking, okay, the next book I'm going to write, it was Guide to the Good Life, The Ancient Art of Stoic Joy. And I thought when they gave me a contract on it, I thought I was just the cleverest guy around because this book wasn't going to sell even a dozen copies, and half of them would be bought by relatives who felt compelled to do it. And then the interesting thing was I actually tapped into some kind of nerve where people started realizing, oh yeah, this does make sense. So the first Stoic book would be the end of the preceding book. And in that book on desire, that's where I'm talking about the hedonic treadmill and how we're wired to be discontented and how with some thought, some reasoning, we can overcome that. Not completely, but we can ameliorate that.
The interesting piece, well, then loads of interesting pieces, but you talk about how you came to Stoicism, and it seems like you've been practicing since you're sort of, I guess, around the 50s mark. What has surprised you most about practicing Stoicism?
It's got just increased. There are depths. There are new strategies that I kind of stumbled across. I don't know whether the Stoics themselves, the ancient Stoics, came up with them. One is what I call prospective retrospection. Fancy term, huh? Prospective retrospection, where at this very moment you pause to consider what this moment will seem like many years from now. So you're looking forward to how you're going to look back on this very moment that you're experiencing. So what are you and I doing? We're doing an interview here. Well, if all goes well, and I'll get there before you do, but if all goes well, there will be a time in life where we just aren't up for doing this. Life is tricky in a number of different ways. And then it's possible that in life we'll be sitting there in a nursing home or whatever, and just mind will wander, and we'll wonder, wouldn't it be great to be back to that moment? Wouldn't it be great to be with a microphone in front and having this conversation? Man, I'd give anything to be back to that very moment. But you're there right now. That's the thing. And if you think in those terms, then hallelujah, hallelujah. This is absolutely incredibly breathtakingly wonderful. And of course, or you can think, yeah, when I get this interview done, then I got this report I have to fill out. Ah, man, my days are a grind. You just bring freshness to things that would otherwise be just the humdrum activities of everyday life.
What's really lovely about the Stoic, I guess, techniques is they're so psychological and they're so practical. The line you can make I can't remember who said it. Maybe it was Milton or someone like that. The line you can make a heaven out of a hell and a hell out of heaven.
Yes.
It seems so salient here because whether it's appreciating this moment and how you look back on it, or your circumstances could always be worse, it seems like your whole life and your whole feeling about your life starts with just your inner monologue and how you choose to perceive things, and that theme of perception, which sounds like to the Stoics was very malleable. And I don't think to a lot of people they think it is malleable. They think, oh, I am my thoughts, right? If there's a negative thought that comes in, that's me. I can't think to reframe that in any way or objectively. So what would you say to people who struggle with just this sort of negative inner monologue?
I have a negative inner monologue, okay? Full confession here. So I have strange sleep patterns. I fall asleep at 8 o'clock every night. On a difficult night, maybe 8:02, but my wife's always impressed by my head hits the pillow and then I'm gone. So I don't think I've done anything special to earn that, but it's just a fact about me. But I routinely wake up in the middle of the night, so like a 1:32, and then when I'm lying there, then the intrusive thoughts come in. So I'm a human being. You see, this is part of the thing, and it really is an interesting thing. Now, if you're taking the Zen line, the paradox is it's my mind, and yet I can't control what's going on in it. So my mind has a mind of its own, which is really strange, but it's true. So I'm well aware of that phenomenon. And when I do, I simply try to distract myself until I get tired and bored and then fall asleep again. But that's part of the human condition. So physically, our human condition is we're limited in what we can do. Cannot stay underwater for 10 minutes the way whales can, and we can either say, man, it's just not fair. but mental part of us too. We are this weird hybrid where we've got this really high powered reasoning ability right next door in our brain to a part that is like an angry, crazy neighbor, right? Who is just willing to get up in the middle of the night and yell his anger at the world and wake up everybody around him and so on. And that's just part of the human condition. So the trick is, and this is another nice Stoic slogan, do what you can with what you've got where you are. So you're trapped in this uh, body with a mind that can reason alongside these very basic kind of impulses. And so, what do? You try to make the most of it. And what does that involve? That involves number one, realizing you're lucky you've got the part that has the rational part, because otherwise you'd simply be an animal. And then the second thing is you can use that rationality to develop strategies. Now, we've been talking mostly about A Guide to the Good Life, but in the next Stoic book, which is called Stoic Challenge, the interesting thing is if you're clever, you can actually harness those negative emotions and make them work for you. And so I describe these games you can play. So, for instance, when you have something that's frustrating, you can sort of say, well, I can either treat this as just a really frustrating situation, or I can turn it into a kind of a game. Who am I playing against on this game? Okay, Stoic gods, I have to be clear here that I don't actually believe in Stoic gods. It's a psychological trick, right? So you pretend. And then the thing is, they're the ones who caused you this. How do you win the game? By going through it, using your wits to try to solve the problem you're presented with, doing the best you can with what you've got. And then if you do that, you win. If you just get frustrated and angry and everything else, you lose. And the Stoic gods were testing you. Next question, why would they do that? Are they just evil? No, a good coach treats his athletes how, or her athletes how. He tries to toughen them up, tries to push them hard. So I want you all to get out there and I want you to run 10 laps. And when they're done with the 10th lap, what do? Oh, I was mistaken. I want you to do 12. Do two more, right? That's what a good coach will do. What's a bad coach? Somebody who says at the end of the first lap, oh, it looks like you people are getting tired. Come rest, have a snack, have some water. That's a bad coach if the point is that they're trying to develop you um, in physical terms. A good coach is going to push you, push you, push you, not break you, but push you to develop you. So these Stoic gods are taking the same approach with us. The most truly miserable person on the planet is probably somebody who's been pampered and who doesn't know what it's like to undergo hardship, because then for that person, everything will count as hardship. For somebody who hasn't been pampered, who's lived a rough and challenging life, then a challenge comes up and they're confident. Oh, this is nothing compared to what I've been through. I don't encourage your listeners to climb Mount Everest. It's really expensive and you can die. But here's the thing, if you have climbed Mount Everest and somebody presents you with a new challenge and says, do you think you can handle this? Now, you shouldn't be blurting this out, but you have in the corner of your mind, well, I climbed Mount Everest, so yeah, I think I'm up to the challenge you described. So you build self-confidence. So it's an interesting thing. You're taking these, what could be the annoyances of daily life, and what you're doing is you're turning them into a training regimen where it's going to make you stronger. You're going to have increased self-confidence as a result. So that's a really neat thing. I get a tingly feeling thinking about that. So you're doing the thing that most people say is just downside with no upside. And you're saying, actually, there is an upside, but you got to approach it in the right state of mind. And then you can extract something valuable from it.
it's profound, the reframing of how a reframing of a negative situation can, and to bear it, can turn it into a positive situation or a training ground for your mind, as you too elegantly said. The concept of equanimity came to mind when you said that, and how to keep it. And so, sort of any positive thing happens in your life is fine. This will pass. Enjoy it, but no, it will go. And then the negative side of the coin is, okay, this is a test to test my character and my resolve. And as I like the gamification of it. And I
Yeah.
haven't actually read the Stoic Challenge. So um, where does the Stoic Challenge pick up from where the Good Life left?
Good Life was an attempt to say, hey, here's what Stoicism is. Here's why you should give it a test in your life. I'll tell you enough about it that you can give it a test drive and see whether it's working for you. Stoic Challenge is much more applied. It's the difference between teaching somebody. Let's see, I'm going to come up with a mangled metaphor here, but teaching somebody the rules of golf and then saying, okay, so you really want to get a good game. Well, you have to put some backspin on. I don't even know. I don't play golf. This is a dangerous metaphor for me to have explored here. But the point is that it's more practical. It's okay. So now you're practicing Stoic. You're in everyday life. So what do you do as a practicing Stoic? Well, and I describe a bunch of different things. Something bad happens to you. This whole idea of framing. You don't have you have some control, but not complete control over what life does to you. But you have extensive control over the frame in which you put the event. And so you can put it into an ugly frame and you can put it into a beautiful frame. So it's up to you to decide how to frame it. So I described several frames. I mean, one thing is you can make a joke out of something, and it's quite successful if you can do it. Certainly, if somebody insults you and you respond, you turn it into a joke. Like my favorite one is, well, if you think that's my biggest shortcoming, you clearly don't know me well enough to be insulting me. No, seriously, you need to do your homework because that would be not by no means the worst of my shortcomings. You turn it into a joke. And, the interesting thing is it's very effective as a strategy. They hit you with their best shot. You laughed it off. Okay. Another game is when something bad happens to you, you think, oh, this is going to be a great story to tell, right? So I'll have cases where people I know will tell me something disastrous that happened to them, and I'll go into great detail and the ins and outs and everything else. And I'll be listening, and then when they finally say, uh, "Yeah, so it's terrible," I said, "Oh, but you got a great story out of it, didn't you?" Right? So you can find, if you put it into storytelling terms, you can take things in life and you can turn them into stories. Comedians do that. I've been interviewed by a few comedians, and it's not a natural, obvious fit, but for them, a lot of comedy is simply taking tragedy and making you smile as a result of it, because you end up with a story to tell. And in the telling of that story, there's lessons to be learned. And you can also put a positive spin on some negative things, which is a wonderful insight. But so the Stoics were the preeminent psychologists of their time. I mean, that they would have come up with all of these strategies, and so it's a good thing we have them. But for me, what was frustrating, this would be in the early 2000s, is that they were an unknown thing. They were there, and people, if you were a philosopher of history, you might talk about them, but the world needed them, and the world was ignorant of them. And what a shame. And now, so I've been keeping low grade track of this. So you can do an advanced search on Amazon, and you can do a search for books that have Stoicism, the word Stoicism in their title. And when I recently look, they're coming out now at about the rate of one per day. These are new books being published. And back when I wrote Guide to the Good Life, there maybe existed 5 books in English, most of them for fellow uh, scholars, right? So it's amazing. It's just taken on a life of its own, and that's exactly what I hoped would happen, because the world needs this, and now the word is out, and that's a good thing.
It is really, really lovely. I think there's a lot of noise out there as well. I would just implore the listener to find some books with a lot of signal. And the Stoic. I'm sure I haven't read the Stoic Challenge, but I will order this very soon. But definitely, The Good Life was my favorite philosophy book so far. Can I just end with some quick fire questions for you?
Sure.
If I may. So, do you have an unusual habit or an absurd thing you love?
Let's see. I exercise. My doctor has said for the time being I have to cut back on that. Uh, but to do interval training where I push myself to the point of exhaustion, I love that.
How do you run? Do you row? How do you do
I
that?
row, I cycle, uh, and of course, rowing can be on the water, but it can be on an erg, a rowing
Mm,
machine. But in my life, I've swum, I've run, I've done a bunch of different things. Cycling, I don't know if I threw that. Yeah, I did.
yeah.
And it's interesting because when I do it, then you get to go through all these mental games, So when I'm doing a piece and I know it's going to take 20 strokes to finish. I know I'm that close to the end. And then what do? I start playing these mental games. So let's just focus on the next 10 strokes. Okay, 10 left. Let's think about the next 5. And you keep break. It's just a mental game.
Mm,
And it seems crazy, but here's the thing. There will be challenges you meet in life where your ability to survive the challenge is for you to simply say, here's the task left to me. Let's see if I can get half of that done. Okay, the next half of a half. And then before you know it, you're done. And so most people don't do that. If they exercise, they certainly don't do intervals. So for me, it's a kind of strange thing, and yet it becomes it feeds on itself. You get these rewards, both physical and psychological rewards. So that would be one thing.
mm. Great answer. I can resonate. I know you. I've heard you mention rowing in a couple of podcasts before. I'm actually in Henley at the moment,
Oh,
so
wow.
yeah, the famous rowing place for
Yeah,
the
yeah.
listener. Yeah, it's good fun. I think a lot of confidence can be learnt from hard interval training for sure. Um, do you have a favorite failure of yours?
Okay. Well, here's a sort of, well, it's a failure that ended up not being a complete failure, but the most recent book project. Um, I described it as swimming upstream in a river of rejection. So working on a book, and I write on books that I think the world needs, and somebody's got to say it, and no one else is saying it, so I'm going to say it. Uh, but man, what a thing, and then you learn to live with rejection. It just becomes, it's a talent, and most people don't have the talent. They hear no once, and that's it. They crawl away. They crawl away. They're done. They try, and it didn't work. And then there are other people who can hear the word no and just carry on to the next no and the next no and the next no after that. Um, and so this most recent project was just a real chain of them, and yet persisted, and it's finally popping out. I just turned in a manuscript 4 days ago. It looks. You never know, though. You never know until the last thing. But that would be the whole thing wasn't a failure, but it was a chain of
Mm.
failures leading up to success. So I'm not sure if that's what you wanted, but in a way, it's even more interesting because you should do things at which there's a good chance that you're going to fail. How come? Because if you don't want ever to fail in life, I'll give you the secret answer solution. Don't ever try anything hard. Do only things that are easy. You will never fail, but you will never succeed either. So that's the downside. So failures would be, I would say, you should be experiencing them. If you're not pushing yourself, and you should be experiencing them. And as you do, it's a chance to get good at failing. And so what do? The worst failure of all is the failure you learn nothing from. So you fail and you go on to fail in a new, different, and better way. And if you keep pushing it, um, success might lie there. Now, maybe not, but you can go away saying, you know what, I really did give it my best shot.
In your experience, what advice do you think people need to hear the most these days? Maybe if you could put something on everyone's Instagram feed, or maybe the billboard would be better. If you could put something on a billboard, what would you put?
Do what you can with what you've got where you are. I don't have any tattoos, but that would be a candidate. Uh, for the first tattoo because it gives you a manageable level of what counts as success, right? So if you did what you could with what you had where you were, what more could you have done? If that wasn't enough, then you needn't feel bad about it because you did what you could. And, so it simply wasn't in the cards for you. And oh, by the way, the fact that you couldn't doesn't mean you're a bad person, doesn't mean you're a failure. It means you're a human, and you're a human who's trying, and that's the most you can do. And a lot of people though don't take it that way. It's interesting. And back to how we started the conversation, that's because a lot of people just assume what everybody's doing is the way it should be done, and that's not the case.
Mm. Yeah, you got to have courage to carve your own path. I think, especially nowadays where silly games are being thrown at you, and there's this perceived life you should live on Instagram, and I think it can deviate people from the life that maybe they want to live. Um,
They're living the one life they have, trying to impress complete strangers by going online, by saying, "Hey, everybody, look at me," and what a waste of a life that is. Now, if you told me, you know what, I'm working really hard to be the kind of person that a Stoic like Seneca said I should try to become, or even if you told me somebody like Jesus said I should try, good for you. But if you say, okay, I got this negative kind of review from or comment from this guy, Jojo XXY31. Well, who is he? I don't know, but he didn't like what I did. So, okay, you're crazy. Why do you care? You don't even know. You don't know what his values are. So maybe it's a good thing that he doesn't like you if his values are wrong. Anyway, but I look around and I see that going on, and breaks my heart.
Me too, especially young kids growing up on this, and it's
Yes,
worse. I'm
yes,
28 now, and it's a
yeah.
lot worse for little kids growing up with it, and yeah, difficult to be a parent and managing that. I think these days, I'm not a parent, but if I was, last one from me, Bill, is do you have any books you could recommend for people trying to find their way in life, maybe trying to foster their goal in living, or just general books that you might be enjoying at the moment? Feel free to interpret it however you want.
I'll circle back to Thoreau. Walden made a difference in my life, and now there's large parts of it First two chapters and last chapter are where the meat of the thing is. There's middle chapters where he tells you how to harvest ice on a pond. You know, neat stuff, but you don't really need to know it. But just this stuff on, okay, just think about the life you're living and compare it to the lives of the people around you. And are they really the ones who know what's best, or is there some higher thing? And again, only recently has it dawned on me the impact that that had on my subsequent life.
Well, I can't thank you enough for that. It's been a real privilege to spend some time with you and have this conversation. So yeah, really appreciate it, and no doubt the listener will have a really good time listening to this. So thank you once again.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.